all of the stuff that Carl is talking about and that you shared, it gets my adrenaline going. Like right now I feel like I just had 4 cups of coffee, espresso shots actually. Because it is the world that I like to live in terms of helping people grow, right? And so as we think about the leadership roles that we hold, it's about the people that we're pouring our lives into, right? And so my staff are very clear about that position that I take in terms of the dynamic of our culture. When I got to this organization, it wasn't in a good space. And actually some of the words to describe the former leader were things like tyrant and dictator. And so sometimes here along this path we've had to just pause and have a little PTSD time to get that out. And what I found coming into this job is that in my second interview I was able to interview with some of the staff. And actually Georgia and Jennifer are newer since I've been here. But some of the other staff that stayed on after I came on board. And what I realized was, and one of the things that really compelled me to go after this position strongly, was life doesn't have to be like that. These people needed to know that they could be loved for who they were and for what they wanted to contribute as far as their value goes to the world, and that former leader did not do that for them, and it broke my heart. So I'm going to do something a little weird this evening. I'm going to take my shoes off. I'm going to do it for a couple reasons. One, it's more comfortable. Two, it creates this like funky space, right? It's like, oh, I've never seen somebody speak without their shoes off, especially when they're in a coat and a tie, right? Three, if you don't remember anything I say tonight, you're going to remember my dinosaur taco socks, which were given to me by Jennifer this last Christmas because I wear crazy socks in the office and I often leave my shoes around the office and have to try to, somebody reminds me, hey, your shoes are in the... Anyway, and so she found these and couldn't resist buying them for me, and so anyway, they're special socks to me. As I contemplated what I was going to talk about this evening, the last phone call that I had with Carl kind of intimidated me. He said, well, let me explain to you a little bit about who's going to be in the room. And he started telling me about how you're highly educated and how you are leadership coaches. I always wondered what it would be like to be a leadership coach. I'm not trained in that. In fact, I had one speech class in Chemeketa and people asked me, well, how'd you learn how to present? I don't know, I did have a speech class at Chemeketa Community College. That's my credential. And so when he was explaining to me your credentials, I thought, what do I have to offer a group like this? Right? And that's my gremlin stepping in to attack me. And I realized that I have to take some of my own medicine because the people that I engage with and who I want to inspire to be better in their lives, I tell them that you have to let some of that baggage and that negative thinking go, right? And so then I realized that I have to press into this seemingly intimidating, I'm not quite as intimidated now after having heard you all talk, but this space where I don't feel credentialed. And the cool thing is, I don't have to have credentials to be a leader. And the people that you're coaching don't have to have credentials to be a leader. And in our society, especially in some of our institutional spaces, credentials are everything, right? And so we present this notion as a society sometimes that without credentials, your value isn't the same, and it's simply not true, right? So I want to, whenever I go and I hear somebody speak, especially if I hear that they're really good, I always like to know, how did they get there, right? How did they get to that place? Like there's a story behind that. And you all have stories, and we get little glimpses. You crack open the window as we go around and we share. So I'm going to share a little bit because I get pretty excited about what I get to do every day. This is not work to me; it's a calling. I heard someone say that, or that was one of our words in our circle. This isn't work; it's a calling, right? And so how does one get to a place where they have found their calling, and they have this visceral sense that this is what they were created to do? So I want to share a little bit about my background story as to how I got here. I went to Corbin University 100 years ago when it was Western Baptist College, feels like. I graduated in '92 from Western Baptist College, now Corbin University. I majored in finance. While I was majoring in that degree, I needed to have a part-time job, right, to get through school. And so I went to work for a contractor in the Salem area there, and finished college. But during the course of working for the contractor, I was working with my hands, and I had a knack for it. In fact, I was pretty good at it. And the carpenters at the time, they were teaching me and anxious to teach me. They saw that I had aptitude for that kind of skills learning. And so I got to learn how to be a finished carpenter. Best way to get into construction, by the way, as opposed to framing outside in the rain. That was nice. So I got to learn how to be a finished carpenter. And when I graduated college, I thought, these skill sets are pretty valuable. And if I have these skill sets, no one will be able to take them away from me. Right? So I decided that I created my first mountaintop, if you will, and that was to build my own home. I'm going to stay with this employer, even though I'm sitting on this degree, this credential. I'm going to stay in construction and until I have enough skill and knowledge to be able to build my own house, which I did, and that's a fun story in itself with how I was able to pull that first build off with no money and our first child, young, married, and that whole bit. No down payment, which I was able to turn sweat equity into a down payment. I doubt banks will do that for you now, but it worked then. And so 9 years into that gig, I thought, I should really try to start getting some mileage out of this degree. I did pay for it, still was paying for it. And so I started looking at, okay, what next? What does someone with a finance degree get to do? And I was getting interviews at banks, interviews for insurance companies, and I would walk into these offices, and if you recall back in the day in those kinds of places, I don't know if it's changed now, seas of cubicles. And we were talking about an 8 by 8 foot space. Now, I've been out in the field for 9 years, engaging with people, building cool stuff, getting to step back and see the accomplishment of my work, and now I'm looking at an 8 by 8 cubicle and anticipating that I would have to sit there for 8 hours a day. I couldn't do it. So then that caused a little turmoil. It's like, well, what do I do then if I don't do that, right? And fortunately, through a set of circumstances, I came across an employer who was looking for their first construction project manager. So their company had grown to the extent that they needed that resource. And I was able to go to work as a construction project manager. Now, as a young 30-something punk with a truck and a telephone and managing projects from Corvallis to Portland, some of them federal, right down to residential housing, some commercial projects, I thought I had it made. That was a good gig. I loved coordinating the schedules and project managing and helping make sure the tenant's happy and all of that stuff. Last big project I did was for the Environmental Protection Agency over in Newport. We did a big re-roof where all the scientists are down in the building, and so we can't get dust on anything. But we're up there pounding around on this roof, taking stuff off, the heating units and all that stuff. And so I was on the roof, off the roof, on the roof, off the roof, making sure everybody's happy. Project went really well. We actually had our federal project managers come in and evaluate. And they said, actually, this is one of the best projects we have going on the West Coast. And I thought, yes, we're doing something right. And that was my last project in that gig, and here's why. During the course of that, the boss and his wife both worked in the office. You'll come to points in your life where you have these moments where you've got to decide which path you want to take, right? And one of those paths might mean certain sacrifice, right? And so the boss and his wife, they both worked in the office, and they didn't get along. And he would tell me to do something, she'd get mad at me for it, and I'm thinking, life is too short for this. Now, I am not a high-stress individual, and during that time in my life, I think I experienced anxiety because I knew that I enjoyed my work, but it wasn't fun to be there under those circumstances. And I was thinking, well, how do I give up what I enjoy doing because of this nonsense? But it didn't feel right to stay. And I was wondering, what do I do? So actually, I was driving home one day, and I was in the company truck. And I don't know if you're familiar, when you're heading out Highway 22, there's a prison there, and there's a big hill. And I was cresting that hill one day, and I said this prayer. Because I was in turmoil. I was waking up at night, and it was a tough time in my life. I said this prayer, and I said, Lord, don't remove me from this particular circumstance until you've taught me everything I needed to know. I need to know. And I began to cry.
Wow, that's a huge prayer.
Because I realized in that moment that was the freeing thing. I needed to give up. I didn't know where I was headed, right? And being people of faith, you understand that sometimes we just get into those spaces where we feel like we're being ignored at times. Why do I have to be here? But that was very freeing. And that was kind of weird, but at the time then, as soon as I felt that wave of reassurance come over me, the clouds parted, the sun came out, it was a cloudy day, and so anyway, it's kind of an interesting little moment that I had there in the truck. And so then things began to move. After I came to that where I'm going to let go, right? A friend of mine, so my wife and I at that point, we've been doing proctor care, which is care of adjudicated youth in your home. These kids have been convicted of their crimes, and then we were the home to transition, because our first two little ones were girls. I have 4 daughters now, actually, much older. At any rate, we had been doing that work for 5 years. And so in that space where I was wondering what to do next, a buddy of mine gave me an ad in the paper that said, wanted someone to teach at-risk youth construction trade skills, no teaching certificate required. And I thought, well, that sounds like something I want to teach. I looked into the Master of Arts of Teaching program at Willamette University and realized that's going to be too expensive and too much of a time commitment with a young family, so I don't think I can pull that off. So what do I do now? So this ad comes up. So I go and apply for the job, and got a second interview, realized I really wanted to do that work. But then my wife and I, we had to have a real serious conversation, because if I backed up and took that fork in the road, it meant a 50% pay cut to our family budget, right? And so essentially it was starting over on a different career path. Now, at the time, as circumstances would have it, we managed a manufactured home park. It was 133 or 136 spaces. So our housing was provided, and all the bills associated with housing were provided, and we got a little bit of a salary in that role. And so those set of circumstances allowed us to go ahead and say, all right, yeah, let's make this jump, and we'll just see where it takes us. I haven't looked back since. That's what got me into nonprofit work. So what I did then for 10 years was I taught at-risk youth ages 16 to 24 construction trade skills by building Habitat for Humanity houses, right? And over that 10-year time frame, we built 20 homes. Think about this for a second. That's 20 low-income housing units built for the state of Oregon by kids who had dropped out of high school. That's a resource. And that's a resource that often in our communities we don't consider a resource. And so what I began to see through the course of that work is that these young people are absolutely brilliant. And society doesn't see it. And so my heart just went out to them. And I became about, how do I help these young people be successful in life? And in that first year, I was going to save them all. And what I learned in that first year is you can only save the people who want to be saved, right? You can only help the people who want help, right? And you probably bump into that in the course of your coaching and training. If they don't want it, it's not going to happen. One of the things I tell groups of young people when I speak to them is the most frustrating part of my work is that I can't make you want this. If I could make you want it, my job would be easy. But the want, that's on you, right? And I do some things that help them understand that concept. So I ended up doing that for 10 years, and then I got to a point where I thought, well, there's not really a career path here. Nonprofit's a little tough to find your career ladders, right? And so I thought I should start looking for something else. And another friend of mine let me on to a posting for the executive director of Habitat for Humanity in Salem. The work I was doing was in Lebanon, in Linn County. And I thought, well, that sounds intriguing. I think I could do that. I've got construction skills and that whole bit. So I looked into that and applied. And what I realized was in that moment, or in those moments where I was trying to figure out if I should make the move, I was really going to miss frontline service. What I got to do every day is take young people out to a job site, teach them how to use tools, and we actually build stuff. And at the end of the day, when we're driving away, they're looking back at what they created. And what I realized through that work was that helped them realize that they could add value to their community. And that, in turn, helped them see value in themselves, which changed their perspective on authority, their friends, and their education process, right? They had to learn that, well, maybe I need different friends if my friends aren't helping me go in the right direction. And so I often say that if I do the work that I do today really well, it's because of how much those young people taught me. And I would tell them every year I started a new group, you're going to teach me more this year than I will teach you. And I meant it. And they didn't get it. But they kind of started getting it as the year went on. So that was just an enjoyable time in my life. I did that for 10 years with one brief stint to Gulfport, Mississippi, because the program is called Youth Build. It's it's an international program now. But I applied for and got a job as a construction project manager through an AmeriCorps grant, where what we did was we flew Youth Build students from all over the country to Mississippi to help low-income families rebuild. An absolutely amazing year. Came back, re-engaged in the work, and then in 2011 moved to executive directorship at Habitat for Humanity. What caused me to make that move? Now think about your leadership journey, right? Why do you make these steps to move into these leadership roles that you all have and are passionate about? What caused me to make that move and let go of that frontline engagement of those young people, which I absolutely loved, was the thought that I would have influence over more resources to affect positive change in more young people. That's what allowed me to move into more of an administrative role, because I knew that meant that I wasn't going to be engaging as much on the front line. So as I looked at the Habitat position coming to Salem, I realized Salem didn't have a construction training program of the kind. And it was surprising to me. So as the Habitat director, then I decided that it would be good if we trained young people skills sets on our job sites. And so Habitat wasn't in good shape when I got there either. I had to do some restructuring and build a team and all of that and kind of cast a new vision and so forth. And part of that new vision was that we would train young people on our job sites. The way Habitat works is by teaching people with no skill how to do something when you show up on a Saturday to volunteer and a house gets built over time, right? So why not teach young people who need the skill sets to get into employment ultimately, and the house still gets built? That's just a win-win for the community. So we didn't have any money. At Youth Build, we had Department of Labor dollars that we were able to utilize to do our programming. At Habitat, I had zero. So I went out and started knocking on doors and trying to get people excited about the concept of training young people on the Habitat job sites, right? And was able to secure a $40,000 grant from Downtown Salem Rotary that allowed us to leverage and write another grant to the Oregon Community Foundation. That allowed us also then to partner with then Job Growers. This organization used to be called Job Growers until Georgia helped me rebrand it. And I partnered with Job Growers at the time from the Habitat chair. During that process, I was learning about this organization and kind of the turmoil that was going on inside it, and I literally said this out loud, and there's about 3 people present when I said it. I feel sorry for the guy that's going to end up with that organization. I don't now, but at the time it wasn't in good shape. And so we were able to build a youth skills training program. I think that's what got me on the radar for this gig. I wasn't looking for this job. I was arm twisted, cajoled, however you want to say it, by several community leaders who knew that we needed good leadership in this space, and I was honored that they felt that I could do it. I was very intimidated. I was going from about $1 million budget to what I thought at the time was about 9, but that's because it had stimulus funding, and then it became 4 as I was coming on board, and now it's 6 to 9 depending on how we count our grants. And so that's how I ended up here in this role. This organization is a 501c3, but we're funded mostly by federal and state dollars. As soon as I say that, it's very hard to help people understand that we are still a nonprofit, even though we have those kinds of dollars funneling through us. Now, those dollars come with all kinds of strings and outcomes and so forth, and so what we do is we invest in skills training the workforce, both on the adult and youth sides. We represent a workforce board, which is federally mandated by legislation that if I printed it and put it in a binder, it's about this thick, and we follow that legislation to do our work. It dictates kind of how we roll that piece. And then we get some other discrete grants that we go after to do different kinds of initiatives, which I'll talk about here in a second. So that's the type of organization that we are. You have one up here in the Portland area. It's called Work Systems, Inc. That's your workforce board for Multnomah and what's the county next to it? Washington, Multnomah counties. So you have a workforce board that really engages in much of the type of things that you'll hear me talk about. So I do have, check my time here so I pace myself accordingly. I do have 3 points, if you'd like 3 points, and I'll get to those here in a second. They are: be aware, be available, and be vulnerable. First, I want to talk about some of our initiatives. So I do have a rap card here that talks a little bit about what we do. But in my leadership experience, one of the things that I shoot for, that those points will play to, is creating a platform where the people who work for me can learn and grow, obviously, but be as creative as possible, right? And so I just wanted to share a couple of our initiatives and how applying these things in my work has paid off in ways that I can't even believe sometimes. My staff is amazing. I know they're sitting here now, but I would say this if they weren't in the room. And we have other amazing staff that aren't here tonight. I have about 16 staff? 17 staff. It blows my mind what we're able to do. So we have 3 big initiatives. So the main areas we work in are adult services, adult and dislocated worker it's called, business services, and youth services. Those are our 3 big arenas. In our business service arena, we have a discrete grant called Make It in America, where we're working with manufacturing companies, and one of the pieces in that is to create some sustainability mechanisms where those manufacturing companies can help each other thrive. Now, imagine the amount of meetings you have to get through before those companies who compete against each other, in some cases, are willing to share information with each other. Took us a while to get there, but we're there now. It's very exciting. So what this grant is allowing us to do is create a program in lean manufacturing. With the dollars, what we did was we invested in the training. So we paid for the training, which a black belt lean training is very expensive. We paid for that training for those who would volunteer to take it, but to take the training, you had to be willing to teach that information to another company in the future. that's how we built in a sustainability mechanism for the training of that kind of teaching. So that's one initiative, and just one piece of that much larger initiative. 1.2 million, I think, in that one. The other initiative is called Rethinking Job Search. Now, we rolled that out statewide, so that is happening in your workforce centers up here in Portland. And so Jennifer, who you heard earlier, she's the project manager for that $3 million 5-year grant that is now rolling out a concept that we devised in our office statewide. We get to test it. And what it tests is cognitive behavioral techniques in workforce development. So the curriculum is called Rethinking Job Search that we developed in-house. And we're utilizing that curriculum in this initiative on a statewide level now to test. There's a $450,000 line item in that $3 million grant to test whether or not cognitive behavioral techniques actually does work in workforce development. The feds liked the idea. They said, yeah, here's $3 million. Go see if it works. That's pretty exciting. Where we're at now is we had to prove that no one else in the nation was doing it because this is called the Workforce Innovation Fund, right? So the state of Oregon now is leading the nation in this effort under the guidance of Jennifer, rolling out this project through 10 workforce centers in the state. That spun off another thought that we had in respect to that curriculum. And so I went to my curriculum developer and I said, is it possible to develop a curriculum that aims more at the youth demographic? Now, when I say youth, I really mean youth and young adult, because our initiative is 16 to 26 years old. So we developed something called the Career Achievement Network. Here's the RAC card for that. It's region-wide for us right now, but I have folks around the state asking about this initiative, right? So the point here is what can be done if you create the space to develop leaders who develop leaders who develop leaders to do cool stuff, right? So my curriculum developer said yes. And so we created a curriculum called Rethinking Careers. So the adult side is Rethinking Job Search. That is, I had a job, I lost a job, I'm going through the emotional turmoil of that, right? And I need to get a handle on it. Where that hit home for me is one day I went to the WorkSource Center. So I didn't do a lot of adult service in my career, and I like to connect with the front line and make sure that the decisions I'm making at an administrative level have the right effect on the ground, right? So I went over to the WorkSource Center after the Hagen's layoff. I think you guys had a layoff up here too. We had one in Kaiser. And 2 ladies came in. And I started talking to them. I was going to be working with a career coach that was working with them. And one lady said, I've been in the finance department of this company for 25 years. The other one was closer to 30. The gal that had been there for 25 years, it just caused me pause for a second. And I'm thinking, 25 years with a company, and one day you wake up and you're told, you no longer have a job. What does that do to you psychologically, right? So here's what blew my mind. We went back, we sat down with that career coach. And the career coach, and I'm kind of sitting in a chair in back, and I'm just watching and listening. And she said, so tell me about your skill sets. And here's what she said. She said, well, I don't have any. That shocked me. 25 years in this finance department of a company, and in that moment, she didn't have any skill sets. What that says is she had lost her value. She had lost belief that she could offer value to the world. It just blew my mind. Now, the career coach was amazing because she coaxed it out of her and she started saying what skill sets she had. And all of a sudden she says, well, maybe I do have some skill sets. And that told me that that's why this cognitive behavioral techniques piece is so important. I'm so glad we get to test it. So then we developed the youth curriculum. The youth curriculum is way different, different thinking challenges on the youth side. And if you've ever been an employer, you might relate to some of this. So the youth side is, I'm 20-something years old. I've never held a W-2 job. I think I'm all that in a pack of chips, so I want to make big bucks and I don't want to do the dirty work.
That's so like youth.
That's different kinds of thinking challenges than my adult over here who had a job and is really just needing to kind of, find themselves and get back on track. So those are the two curriculums, our two big adult and youth initiatives that are tied together. And I can't really take credit for it, maybe some of the vision pieces of it, but I have an amazing staff that rolls this stuff out. So how does an organization get to where it can do this kind of stuff? We have people knocking on the door all the time asking about the youth curriculum because they see the value in it. I have public schools now knocking on the door, and I'm just trying to slow the thing down, partly because my staff says I need to slow down, but I'm like, there's a lot that could be going on here, and we're trying to meter it, plus we're trying to make sure that when this rolls out as a product, which we did copyright it, by the way, as an asset to the organization, which is going to be really fun to see where that goes. But trying to stay ahead of it, trying to make sure that when we do it right? And so as a leader, that's part of what we need to think through in terms of strategizing and moving an organization and doing the innovative kinds of things that we need to get done. So, be aware. What that's about is understanding who you are as a leader. I read a book a little bit ago by Simon Sinek called Start With Why. Have you read that book? Yes. Start With Why by Simon Sinek. That book helped me to articulate my life's vision, mission, and method into statements. Now, I had been about leadership growth for a long time. For a long time in my life, I was trying to avoid being the leader. People were pushing me in that direction. Maybe you had that experience where you felt like, gosh, people are starting to depend on me. They're asking me for advice and things like that. I mean, in my young 30s, I was getting into this space where I'm like, no, that's not me. I'm not really, I just belong for the ride. Kept ending up in leadership roles, and finally one day I decided to own it. And so I decided to start studying about leadership, reading Maxwell and all those other great authors around leadership, and just taking that on myself, to personally grow in that area. And so, so you got to know. So here's my statements. My life's vision is to inspire others to challenge the status quo. That's why I get out of bed. And when you understand what drives you, why you get out of bed, you can do that anywhere. It's not your job that defines you. And society today is telling us that our job, our career, whatever it is, it defines us, and I disagree. What defines you is your why, right? For me, it's to inspire others to challenge the status quo. I can do that at this job, and I'll do it at my next one if the board runs me out. Because I can always do that, right? My mission is to find others who align with that vision and create a common platform for that voice to be heard, right? How do you get an initiative done? You have to find people who believe what you believe, and you bring them together and you do something very exciting. What I love about the vision that you were casting right here for us is it's big. Folks, leaders, people are so weary of being asked to do little. People want to connect with something that's bigger than themselves. And when you articulated that, I'm like, that's big. That will draw people. You cast a vision big enough and people will come out of the woodwork. It's unbelievable how that happens, but you have to cast it. Somebody has to articulate it. And if you're not the one in your organization, what I tell people is find the person in your organization who isn't. Let them do it. If they're a better storyteller than you, let them do it. Right? So my mission, find others who align with my vision and create a platform for that common voice to be heard. My method is by building mutually collaborative relationships wherever I go. Mutually beneficial relationships wherever I go. So I have a vision, I have a mission, and I have a method that I live by. Now, what that does for me is it allows me to know when to say no. It allows me to know where to put my time. One of you shared that, I'm trying to get my life in better order, or however you said it, right? When you know what you are about, why you get up every day, it's much easier to make the decisions to keep you on that track. There's a lot of things now I say no to. A lot of boards I decline going on to. And a lot of activities that I don't get involved in. Because it has to align with what I'm about, right? So, that's be aware. Be available. This one is about building your teams. Building teams has its moments. People are people, right? Yeah, I heard a funny quote one time. The gal said, we hire people for a list of skill sets, and then we're so darn surprised when the whole person shows up.
That's good.
So, and it is kind of funny, right? But people are people, right? They have emotions, they have feelings, they have aspirations, they have desires, and sometimes they don't have those things, and we try to build that in. And so, in leading an organization or leading people, what you have to do is build a team that's about your cause. And sometimes that means making hard decisions. Sometimes that means realizing that the individual on your team isn't in the right place. Now, if you're a weak leader, you will likely put off addressing that. And that is not fair to the rest of your team. One of the ways I've gotten at that in my own head and for my own well-being, because I want the best for people, whether or not they need to be on my team or they need to be on another team. And that is this, and I shared this early on in a staff meeting, and I probably shared it a little early in hindsight, but what I said is this: it is my desire that you be in a place where you can grow personally and professionally. And if I'm not the leader who can do that for you, please find a leader who can. That's saying quite a bit in a little statement there. Now, it backfired only slightly because some of my more sensitive staff at the time, which I didn't know were so sensitive, thought that I was asking them to quit, and I wasn't. I was really speaking from my heart, saying, I know I can't, I'm not the leader for everyone. I know this, but right now, in this moment, I get to lead this organization. Here's how we're going to do it. If that doesn't work for you, please find a leader where it does, because life is too short to work for a leader that you can't resonate with, right? And then the last one, be vulnerable. Now this one's tough, because society teaches us to be tough, especially if you're a man, right? You gotta be tough, take it in the chin, show no emotion. And that doesn't work for me. My staff knows that I'm a feeler. I've probably gotten a little shaky at times in a staff meeting, depending on what it is I'm talking about or getting passionate about. But this whole concept of having to be tough and look like you have it together all the time, there's a false sense of security in that notion that you can keep that space all the time, right? And the funny thing about vulnerability is, without vulnerability, you lose the ability to be creative, right? So we can get to a space where, well, I don't care what people think. If they don't accept me the way I am, you bumped into those people in your life. I doubt that's happening in this room. But the problem is, when you get to a space where you don't care what people think, you lose your capacity for connection. And you lose your capacity to be vulnerable. And when you lose that, you also lose the ability to be creative and innovative. Because the crazy thing is, as leaders, we step out in front, right? When you're driving that vision, that's a big vision, so you're going to have some critics if you don't already. Like, you're crazy, Mike, what? That's just nuts, right? Now, I love that. Now, that throws fuel on my fire now. So I need critics, because it's like, okay, I'll prove you wrong. But initially, when those critics start to throw their arrows, it's like, oh man, that doesn't feel good, right? I really think I can do this, but they don't have confidence in it or whatever. Your gremlins start playing all the tapes in your head. But we step out, we dare. We dare to do something great. And actually, when I say, my points are vision, mission, and method, I actually like madness, mission, and method, because if your vision's really big, people think you're crazy, right? So that's madness, mission, and method. I like alliteration. So at some point, though, we've got to muster the courage to step out in front, start a business, start a coaching business, whatever those things are. In spite of those fears, we press into those fears to make those things happen. Why? Because people want good leadership. if you remember anything else, remember that people want to be led. They don't want to be managed. You manage systems. You lead people, right? People want to be led. And when I got that straight in my head several years ago, that's when I realized I've got to invest in my leadership ability, because I've been called to do that kind of work. It's a little bit daring, it's a little bit crazy, so I'm going to close with this. There was a quote by Theodore Roosevelt, spoken in 1910 in Paris, France. And if you Google it online, you can look up The Man in the Arena. But there was a quote out of a very long speech that he gave over there called The Citizenship of a Republic. Citizenship in a Republic. And it goes like this. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs again and again, and comes short again and again, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, and who, at best, knows the triumph of great accomplishment, and at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be among those cold and timid souls who will neither know victory nor defeat. Thank you.